Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Zutiv. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. Check out these screens behind me. These are all the feeds coming into the CBS News Broadcast Center. If it's happening out there, it's coming to you live right here. This is CBS News 24/7. Netanyahu stands firm. The Israeli prime minister remains defiant on ceasefire terms as grief fuels outrage in Israel, where negotiations for a deal are right now. 2 United States Marines assaulted by a mob in Turkey, and the incident was caught on camera. What we know about the group behind the attack. Plus, a landslide crisis in California. Hundreds of homes are without power. Residents being told to evacuate. We'll take you there. But we begin in Israel, where grief and anger are fueling calls for a ceasefire. President Biden says Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not doing enough to end the war. Thousands of demonstrators have blocked the streets, demanding immediate action. Take a look at these images behind me. This is, of course, following the killing of 6 hostages. Yesterday, Netanyahu begged forgiveness from the families for not bringing them home alive, but also, as we stated, remained defiant that he would not be bullied into a ceasefire. CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Taib is following all of this for us in Israel. So, Imtiaz, how is Netanyahu navigating these protests, not just the protests, but also calls from his allies, the right-wing allies that he has in the Knesset, to stay on course?
Vlad, good to be with you. Well, look, we've had now 2 days, and we're expecting a 3rd day of very intense street protests here in Tel Aviv. And I can tell you, with all the anguish we're seeing, there's so much rage being directed at Mr. Netanyahu, who made an address to the nation last night where, for a moment, he appeared to be sort of making some sort of contrition, asking for forgiveness for the deaths of those 7 hostages, saying he wishes he was able to rescue them alive. And then very quickly turning away, saying, I am not going to be giving up on my policy, and essentially conducted what effectively was a PowerPoint presentation explaining why he needs to stay in southern Gaza. Now, of course, his allies, his extreme far right-wing allies, want to see the war go on. In fact, they've been quite disparaging about hostage families, and it really just seems to be tearing apart Israeli society, where, as we've been saying, we're expecting more mass protests tonight.
Imtiaz, tell me more about that, the disparagement of the families of the hostages and all of those people in Israel who are protesting. I think it's become clear to those of us on the outside that Israelis can clearly see a difference between the terrorist activities of Hamas. It is Hamas who's responsible for these murders. It is Hamas who is responsible for October 7th. It is Hamas who is using its own people as shields as Israel wages this war. But on the other hand, as you know, as you've reported, the families that are in Israel say that something needs to be done to bring these hostages home so that you don't have the IDF within arm's length, so to speak, of reaching some hostages, and then Hamas just executes them before they allow the soldiers to get to them.
Yeah, I mean, it really just underscores the great complication of all of this. But Israelis are also saying that Mr. Netanyahu wants what they call a forever war, that this war in Gaza, which is now in its 11th month and very likely to progress to a full year, did not need to be conducted the way Mr. Netanyahu has conducted it, which is essentially the almost complete annihilation of Gaza, the killings of over 40,000 Palestinians, mainly women and children. And many here are saying that when you hear him saying that he is not going to stop for this deal and to get the hostages out, the around 100 or so remaining, they say he's doing so because they think he believes that if he ends the war in Gaza, that it will lead to the collapse of his government with those extreme far-right figures that we've been talking about, and that if elections were called today, that Mr. Netanyahu would lose. And why is this bad for him? Not only would he lose his job, but there's a number of corruption cases waiting for him. And many believe that if those cases do go to trial, he will be convicted and he will go to jail. Something that he, of course, clearly wants to avoid. And many hostage families believe that he's willing to essentially have the people in Gaza pay for that and the hostages pay for that as he tries to hold on to power. Vlad.
Well, as you know, Imtiaz, President Biden yesterday said that the United States is still negotiating a quote-unquote final agreement. Who are those talks with, and what do they entail? And I can understand the Israeli perspective that a lot of these leaders, these Hamas leaders, their backers in Qatar, their backers in Iran, even in Egypt, are not really good faith actors in all this. But what choice do the Israelis have?
Yeah, well, look, the U.S. is part of the negotiating team. You have the U.S., you have Egypt, and you have Qatar. Now, Qatar and Egypt are there ostensibly to be the ones to push Hamas into making concessions, and the U.S. is ostensibly there to push Israel to make concessions. But here's the thing, Vlad. We've had the President Biden, for 7 months saying that he believes the deal is close. And we've been speaking to hostage families here who are saying, I don't understand. How can the President of the United States not be able to secure this deal, given all the support that President Biden has given to Israel over these many months? They're saying that they just want to see a deal which would see the hostages released. They say Mr. Netanyahu is the one who's standing in the way, and they want President Biden to do something. But so far, we haven't seen anything, and many don't believe that a deal is anywhere near. Vlad.
So disturbing on so many levels. Imtiaz, thank you very much for your reporting from Israel. We appreciate it. Okay, we're learning more about 2 U.S. Marines who were sent to Turkey to help protect the state of Israel, who then came under attack yesterday. The assault was captured on video. You can see the men who are out of uniform. They are being surrounded by a mob in the city of Izmir. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Holly Williams, who has lived in Turkey, has more now, reporting from London. So Holly, what more can you tell us about this? You know, Turkey is an ally of the United States. It's a member of NATO. How could something like this happen?
Good morning, Vlad. Well, the 2 Marines from the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit are serving on the USS Wasp on a port visit in Turkey and part of an American effort to deter aggression in the Middle East. That video of the incident shows a group of men forcing a bag over the head of one of the Marines as they restrain him and chanting, "Yankee, go home." Now, those men are apparently members of the Turkish Youth Union. That's a small nationalist anti-American organization. The group actually posted the video online, writing, quote, "U.S. soldiers who have the blood of thousands of Palestinians on their hands cannot defile our country." The group has previously protested outside McDonald's restaurants in Turkey, and last year a pro-Palestinian crowd attempted to storm an airbase in Turkey that's used by US forces. The US military says the Marines were not injured and are now back on board their ship, and Turkish authorities say they've detained 15 people in connection with the assault. As you just pointed out, Turkey is a key American ally in the Middle East. I actually lived and reported from Turkey for several years, and I can tell you that generally people there are actually pretty friendly to Americans. Vlad.
All right, Holly, thank you so much for your reporting. Appreciate it. Turning now to the race for the White House. The Harris-Walz campaign is launching its, quote, Fighting for Reproductive Freedom bus tour today in Palm Beach, Florida. And it comes on the heels of its 4th economic ad, which was released this morning. Let's watch.
Kamala Harris is focused on you.
Building up the middle class will be a defining goal of my presidency.
So that ad is titled Focused, and the campaign says it shows Harris's plan to lower everyday costs for middle Americans. So joining me now with the very latest on the Harris campaign is CBS News campaign reporter Aaron Navarro. Aaron, good to see you, my brother. So the Harris campaign ad focuses heavily on workers yesterday. We saw that speech that the vice president delivered. She even posted on social media about it. They launched their 4th economic-focused campaign ad. What is the strategy here with voters? I mean, union members typically, not always, but typically vote for the Democratic ticket. So what are they trying to accomplish here?
Well, more than Vlad, this is expected, of course, to be a close race. The Harris campaign, the Trump campaign, knows they need every single voter they can get. Yes, union members typically vote Democratic, but there has been some concern from those watching the labor union movement that the rank-and-file members are at least curious about Trump in regards to how he would handle the economy, how he would handle immigration. And that's kind of why you're seeing the Harris campaign lean so much into talk about her economic plan, dollars and cents, because still in polling in the ABC poll from over the weekend, you saw Trump with an 8-point advantage over Harris when it comes to the economy and inflation. Republicans have been airing ads tying her to, quote, Bidenflation and some of the frustrations with how President Biden's administration, including her, as vice president, have handled the economy. So they're looking to define her on that issue in the next couple of months.
We also saw, as you know, President Biden join the vice president on the campaign trail yesterday. Does the Harris campaign see an opportunity for the president to do more of this? And I'm curious about, because as you know, Aaron, look, the vibe that Democrats are feeling right now is very, very different than the vibe that they were feeling when President Biden was the nominee. And I wonder, do the Harris folks feel that they need President Biden, or it's a nice to have?
I think, especially in the state of Pennsylvania, his second home state, he provides an advantage. And it's been striking. I used to cover President Biden when he was fully in as a candidate. The reception he's getting now is so different. You're seeing people and hearing people say, thank you, Joe Chance. They're happy to see him. They're thankful that he made the decision. It's selfless in their eyes to step out of the race and let Harris take over. But we're going to expect to see President Biden on the campaign trail. We're going to see him in Michigan and Wisconsin later this week, two crucial swing states that Democrats need to hold on to if they want to win in November.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. Probably just sort of similar to that piece that we saw from George Clooney, where he expressed a very similar sentiment to the one that folks at those rallies are expressing, Aaron. Thank you very much, friend. Appreciate it.
Take care.
All right, let's bring in CBS News campaign reporter Jake Rosen, who's joining me now. He's with the Trump campaign, or at least reporting from the Trump campaign. You are not with the Trump campaign, Jake. As you know, the president released a book today. It's called Save America. What do we know about his plan to save America?
Well, Vlad, this is one of those commercial items that Donald Trump consistently has a hand in, like those Trump sneakers, like the Trump NFTs that we saw. This is a book that is written, or at least has a part of it written after the Butler assassination attempt. On its cover is that fight picture with Donald Trump with his fist pump up in the air. And there's a passage and a statement from Donald Trump in the book about what happened to him that day and how he takes away from it. But the bigger thing is that Donald Trump touts his interactions with world leaders. He talks about his economic message and why people support him. He also pledges some retribution on people like Mark Zuckerberg for, quote, interference in the election in 2020 in that book. It's just another, again, commercial product that Donald Trump has unveiled today to kind of remind his supporters or those who are willing to spend about $100 on a book, just what his 4 years meant and what they can get going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting, though, that he doesn't reference Elon Musk, who, as you know, is supporting the former president in his campaign for re-election, who's been accused of downplaying tweets on X that are in support of the Harris-Walz campaign and upgrading, or I don't know, I'm not a techie, but boosting the tweets of those who are in support of Trump. Not the same criticism there. The other thing that I think is interesting, Jake, is what we've heard from the president, and we saw it again in this interview with Fox News over the weekend, where the former president said he had, quote, every right to interfere with the 2020 election. I think what you're starting to see from the Harris-Walz campaign is, you know what? This complaint that the president has had, the complaining about the election, the complaining about his legal issues is sort of old and stale, and that's how they're attacking him. Has the Trump campaign respond to that line of attack from Harris, which is that, look, we've heard this all before. People are sort of immune to his whines and his complaints about this stuff?
We haven't heard them directly respond to this, but what I will say is over the last handful or so of Trump rallies, as we've gotten closer to and now are after Labor Day, there still is this kind of sowing doubt in U.S. institutions that Donald Trump continues to do when you talk about the election. He said the same thing in Pennsylvania on Friday, again, a critical battleground state he's been spending so much time in and will be back on Wednesday. Also in Michigan, the states where we saw these hotly contested legal battles and a lot of these unfair and not true conspiracy theories kind of floating around about election workers and their involvement in things. So we'll have to keep tabs on, as we get closer, exactly what Donald Trump is saying about this. But certainly that counter argument might have to fall on more Republican ears this time if Donald Trump loses and again claims for, I guess, now the third cycle in a row that he was unfairly treated when it comes to election laws and the results of the election.
Yeah, indeed. All right, Jake Rosen, my brother, thanks. Okie dokie. It looks like a nice weather pattern for the shortened work week in a big part of the country, but there are some problem areas. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the first look at the national forecast. Grant, good to see you. How was your holiday?
Oh, it was great, Vlad. How was yours?
Chill, just staycationing. But weather was great.
Yeah, and it continues to be great in the Northeast. I'll tell you what, this pretty strong cold front swept through, ushering in some cool Canadian air, really bringing in, I'll say, the second taste of fall to the area, but we're getting some drier air, and it really is starting to feel more like fall for a good portion of the eastern half of the United States. Rainy conditions across the south as you get into Florida, all along the Gulf states. But I mean, high temperatures today from Cincinnati to the East Coast. They're running below normal in the mid to upper 70s to lower 80s. Really wet conditions. We'll talk about this a little bit later on, but it extends all the way across the Gulf states into Texas. Meanwhile, building heat over on the West Coast. You thought you were done with summertime. Forget about it. Vegas up around 105 today. Phoenix around 107 degrees. I mean, it's hot in the desert Southwest, but when you've got excessive heat warnings in effect, which they do, you know it's exceptionally hot conditions. In fact, 36 million people across the desert Southwest over into California underneath either excessive heat warnings or heat advisories. Let me show you some of these forecast high temperatures today. 107 in Phoenix, 84 degrees in Los Angeles. That heat continues and actually spreads north as we head into the middle of the week, Vlad. We'll talk about this and we'll focus a little bit more on the flooding conditions across Texas and the Gulf states. We'll get to that here in just a bit, but for now, back to you.
All right, Grant, we'll check in with you at that moment. Thanks so much. We're following some breaking news out of Europe this morning, where a boat carrying migrants has capsized while attempting to cross the English Channel. According to France's Interior Minister, the boat was on its way to Britain from northern France. The minister said 2 people are missing. Several others have been injured in the incident. We're going to keep you updated on the story as it develops. But our partners at the BBC are following developments as we speak. So let's dip into their coverage.
People across, cramming more and more people onto these, very, very dodgy boats.
It is a huge stretch of coastline for the French authorities to monitor, and we're looking at pictures of some of the rescue operation. Is that search and rescue operation still ongoing as we're talking now?
I can't say for certain, but I know that this happened, its height was sort of 5 hours ago now. A boat off Boulogne heading towards the English coast, but not that far from the French coast, it would seem, was seen in great difficulty, it coming apart, breaking up. All the people on board ended up in the water, and that's different from other situations where it tends to be that the boat is gradually sinking, and people have some time to cling to the boat while the rescue services arrive. This time it seems that everyone was in the water as the boat came apart. And there were, at least 50, maybe 60 or even 70 people on board this boat. 50 people have been rescued at least, and then there's this death toll. I imagine now it's a question of treating people on shore and maybe looking for the last bodies that may or may not be out at sea.
Hugh, just a final quick thought, because we got a new government here in the UK.
All right, you've been listening to our partners at the BBC that are covering this terrible incident that we're reporting on now, where migrants have reportedly been killed in an attempt to cross the English Channel from northern France into Britain. We're going to stay on top of this story throughout the day, bring you updates as warranted. But for now, we're going to talk about what's coming up next on the show. Thousands of hotel workers are on strike, and they're walking off the job at 3 major hotel chains across the country. What they're demanding is next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. A nationwide hotel strike against 3 major hotel chains just got bigger, with 200 employees at Baltimore's Hilton Inner Harbor joining the job action yesterday. The union representing hotel workers says more than 10,000 Hilton, Hyatt, and Marriott employees are now on strike across 25 cities, from Boston to the West Coast to Hawaii. Workers are demanding higher pay, better conditions, and the reversal of COVID-era cuts. Meanwhile, hundreds of families are being told to prepare to leave homes because of a landslide over the weekend. Officials cut power to more than 200 homes in Ranchos Palos Verdes as a precaution. This is in California, just south of Los Angeles. CBS News Los Angeles reporter Tina Patel is there and joins me now to talk about this. So Tina, break down the situation for us this morning. What do you know?
Well, Vlad, this landslide here has actually been going on for more than a year now, and both the gas company and the power company has kind of been monitoring things over the last few months. They say in the last few weeks, it's just started to move quicker, and that's why they're now feeling like their utilities aren't stable, they're not safe. And so that's why over the weekend, the power company out here said, we have to shut off the power because we think if we keep it here, our lines could come down. That could start a wildfire. It could be really problematic. So they say their solution is to shut off the power before anything dramatic happens. Unfortunately, that's leaving a lot of people here with kind of nowhere to go, with a very short window to kind of come up with a plan B. So some have been bringing in generators. We talked to some people who have been bringing in RVs because they don't really know if this is something that's temporary or if it might be something that's going to last for weeks and months.
Tina, help our audience understand, because we have a national audience, obviously, on this broadcast, and people are thinking landslides are quick events. But if you just described it, this has been progressively getting worse, but over the course of a year. So when you hear about people that have to evacuate their homes, it's sort of like, so evacuate your home 6 months from now. Is that what we're talking about? Or how are people thinking about this going forward? Because there are some really dangerous factors at play here.
Well, and that's the thing. A lot of people have lived in these neighborhoods for decades, and they said, well, you know, there'd be a little movement. We'd see maybe a crack in the road, but it wasn't something that was so bad. Unfortunately, last winter and spring, it was really wet here in California, and this water just seeped into the ground here, and there was already some kind of small land movement underneath. All of that water at once really kind of accelerated things. So there was a dramatic moment about a year ago where there were some homes that actually came off a cliff and they were red tagged. There was people that had to move. But since then, everybody's been kind of monitoring this area, and they realize that there's a lot more shifting going on than they realized. And it's actually really dramatic. They said in some places it's a foot a week. And that's why they're saying, like, even though we're not seeing the things that we saw maybe a year ago, we are in that situation where things could get bad. And that's why we're a year later saying, hey, we need to turn off your power. We need to turn off your gas. We're really worried.
All right. Tina Patel reporting for us from L.A. Thank you, Tina. Appreciate it. All right. A New York man is expected to be sentenced today for making more than 12,000 threatening phone calls to members of Congress. Who he is and what we know about his guilty plea. That's coming up. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. A look at some of the top stories we are following for you this morning. 49ers rookie wide receiver Ricky Pearsall will miss at least 4 games after being shot in the chest during an attempted robbery. Officials say Pearsall was walking along carrying shopping bags when a 17-year-old suspect attempted to rob him in San Francisco on Saturday. He was released from a hospital on Sunday. Wishing him the best. All right, we're also following another tragic story out of Illinois. 4 people were killed in Chicago after a shooter opened up on a train. Police say all 4 victims appeared to be homeless and they appeared to be sleeping. They were able to track down and arrest a suspect using surveillance video. And moving over to the East Coast, police in New York confirmed that 1 person is dead following a shooting in Brooklyn on Monday. Authorities are still looking for the suspect who opened fire at the West Indian Day Parade in Brooklyn. 4 other people were shot and injured, and police believe that they were targeted. Okay, we've got some breaking news out of Ukraine, where President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia launched 2 deadly ballistic missile attacks. An educational facility and nearby hospital were hit in the city of Poltava, killing dozens. That's in the northeastern part of the country. Joining me now with the latest is senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata. Charlie, this is sort of breaking, so I know the details are still coming into you, but they're saying in Ukraine that this is one of the deadliest attacks yet. What more can we tell us?
Yeah, Vlad, it's certainly shaping up to be that way in terms of casualties. This is according to our friends on the ground, quoting the First Lady. 47 people have been killed, 180 people were injured. There's a lot of people trapped under that rubble, so that death toll may rise. It is the most serious attack, most fatal single attack this year, if those numbers hold. I also want to frame where Poltava is. You know, this isn't what we would consider a frontline town like Kramatorsk or Izium or Bakhmut, places that we're aware of. This is well west of places like Kharkiv, Dnipro. It's a place that we would stay regularly and feel relatively safe. So this is far beyond the front lines, at least 100 miles from the Russian border, 80 miles from any serious front line. And right after the attack, President Zelensky issued a statement on X where he said, essentially appealing to Western leaders, saying, we need long-range weapons. We need the permission to use these long-range weapons against Russian targets in order to stop these attacks. Those two missiles, those ballistic missiles, are really hard to defend against with the air defense systems that Ukraine has in place. That's why they need more and they need longer range, according to the Ukrainians.
So, Charlie, as you know, Ukraine launched a drone strike on Russia just days ago. I mean, this retaliation that we're seeing now from Russia, I mean, it's already pretty bad there. Could it get worse?
It will get worse, Vlad. It will get worse because of the incursion that has already taken place a few weeks ago. You remember Ukrainian troops have invaded Russia. I'll call it that because they've taken over something like 500 square miles. This is serious, and they're setting in. And you call it that drone strike over the weekend. That was about 150 drones that were launched inside Russian territory, largely going after infrastructure, going after power facilities. And President Zelensky commented right after that, saying, we need to bring this war to the Russians, to the people of Russia, to realize this isn't one-sided. You can be hit too. And it's worth noting here, the defense minister, the Ukrainian defense minister, was here at the Pentagon just last week, again, appealing for these long-range weapons and also giving a list of targets reportedly. So this is what we'll see in the days ahead. There's going to be a meeting in Ramstein. The Ukraine contact group will be meeting. I'll be going to that meeting. We'll be able to report on it. And you'll see where America and the coalition allies will then come up with some sort of package as we go forward. But this is no doubt an escalation from both sides. Russia hitting deeper into Ukraine and hitting these military facilities. Ukraine, not only with this incursion, but these drone strikes inside Russia itself. And this is what we're going to expect in the days and weeks ahead, especially as we approach winter.
So no end in sight. Charlie Daggett reporting from the Pentagon for us this morning. Charlie, thank you.
Thank you.
Right now, officials in the United States are unveiling new action aimed at addressing illegal interstate gun trafficking. Attorneys generals from D.C. and Maryland are speaking alongside officials from Everytown Law. Let's watch.
95% of illegal guns come from outside the district. These are the illegal guns that are fueling the deadly, horrific gun violence that has wreaked havoc on so many of our neighbors and so many of our neighborhoods. As was predictable and foreseeable, Mr. Minor turned around and trafficked the guns he purchased from these 3 Maryland gun stores. And not surprisingly, many of those guns became crime guns, guns recovered at crime scenes in the district and in Maryland. Now, these 3 gun stores that we've named as defendants are federal firearms licensees, or FFLs. As federal licensees, they are permitted to sell guns. They are trained and have a legal duty to watch out for straw purchasers like Mr. Minor. And they are required to refuse to sell guns to straw purchasers. It doesn't take a lot of common sense to figure out that someone trying to repeatedly buy the same semi-automatic handgun over a short period of time is a straw purchaser and is buying the guns for illegal purposes. And yet, all 3 of these stores ignored the red flags and instead chose to sell guns to Mr. Minor anyway. They made a choice to put their profits over our public safety, a choice to put their profits over our people. Now, Mr. Minor paid for his crimes.
All right, you've been watching a press conference there as U.S. officials are introducing new action to curb illegal interstate gun trafficking. Of course, we just reported on all the gun violence that happened in this country over the holiday weekend. So this comes as welcome news. Question, of course, is even as this is introduced, these new actions, what kind of legalities will be in place? What kind of laws will be passed by the the United States Congress? My guess is probably not a lot. Okay, a New York man will be sentenced today for making more than 12,000 harassing and threatening calls to more than 50 congressional offices in recent years. 35-year-old Ade Lilly pleaded guilty to 2 federal charges last week. He faces up to 5 years in prison. Joining me now with the very latest is CBS News Homeland Security and Justice reporter Nicole Skanga. Nicole, what kind of sentencing are U.S. prosecutors looking for here?
Yeah, Vlad, back in May, Lilly pleaded guilty to 1 count of making interstate communications with a threat to kidnap or injure. That's punishable by up to 5 years in prison. He also pleaded guilty to making repeated telephone calls, which carries up to a 2-year prison term. Prosecutors with the U.S. Justice Department, though, will ask the judge to sentence Lilly to 18 months in federal prison, according to the sentencing memo. Now, you mentioned Lilly made more than 12,000 harassing phone calls to members of Congress in less than 2 years. More than half of those phone calls targeted congressional offices right here in Washington, D.C. 54 members of Congress from both sides of the aisle. And just to give you a sense, Vlad, in one 2-day period back in February of 2023, Lilly called one congressional representative more than 500 times.
What kind of threats did he make?
Yeah, plea documents say that Lilly's calls were largely answered by staff members and interns for members of Congress, and that he would become angry, use vulgar and harassing language towards those who answered the phone. In one instance, on October 21st, 2022, Lilly called a member of Congress from Maryland, and when the employee picked up the phone, Lilly threatened to kill them, adding, quote, "I'm going to run you over, I'll kill you with a bomb or grenade." U.S. Capitol Police have investigated more than 8,000 threats against members of Congress last year writ large, just to put this into context. And that's been largely consistent, Vlad, since 2021, January 6th, and the days that followed. And that sentencing memo I referenced before also points out that we're in an election year, and prosecutors writing that, quote, "The pervasive rise in threats against elected officials creates a real risk that expressions of violence will become normalized." It goes on to say that this new threat landscape we're in has shown to have an impact on individuals' willingness to perform public service. Just makes you think about all of those interns on Capitol Hill having to pick up those phones every day, Vlad.
Yeah, and Nicole, before I let you go, the question, of course, is, as you reference, all these threats that have been made to politicians over the years, and some threats which have been carried out. Former President Donald Trump, Gabby Giffords, Steve Scalise. It strikes me, perhaps this is not reported as much in the media, but we're hearing Lilly's name now, and we're seeing these documents, and we're hearing about his case. But are there others who actually do go to prison, or do most of those cases fly under the radar?
Well, certainly in the case of January 6th, we've seen, charges against hundreds of individuals there. And I think the U.S. Justice Department is hoping that today's sentencing against Lilly acts not only, as a sort of punishment, but also as a deterrence for others who might be thinking of issuing similar calls. And we've seen some action by prosecutors to also, swiftly carry out justice against those making swatting calls of a similar kind towards, folks on Capitol Hill. But oftentimes these kinds of cases are very difficult. They're very investigative, heavy in terms of lifting for investigators. So, I think prosecutors today hoping to make an example out of this convicted man.
All right, Nicole Skanga, some crucial reporting there for us. Thank you very much, Nicole. Appreciate it. Okay, let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with another look at the national forecast. Grant.
Hey, Vlad, I'll tell you what, across the country right now, we're in that time of year where you really have a difference in conditions. You have some fall-like conditions across the Northeast where temperatures are still in the 60s in many places, but really it's the dry Canadian air that's beginning to move in. Meanwhile, head to the Southwest with me. Look at some of these temperatures. These are current conditions right now. Vegas right now, 85. Phoenix, 87 degrees. And it's only around just 7:39 right now in Vegas. So really starting to deal with some hot temperatures across the desert Southwest. and rainy conditions across the deep south. But for now, pleasant conditions are going to continue across the eastern half of the United States, especially as far south as the Carolinas and all the way up into portions of Maine and Michigan, with high temperatures today ranging from the mid to upper 70s and then some low 80s. The heat's going to build. We're talking about high temperatures today in the lower 100s, but it gets even hotter as we head through the next couple of days. 109 degrees there in Lake Havasu. 84 degrees in LA, 107 degrees in Vegas. But watch as the heat builds to the north as we go into the middle of the week. Places like Portland, Oregon, at 97 degrees out there tomorrow afternoon. Triple-digit temperatures all along the West Coast. Portland, Oregon, 79 today, 97 tomorrow, and then 102 degrees on Thursday. And those near triple-digit temperatures continue into Friday as well. Here's the rain situation. We've got flood watches in effect across Texas. This is all associated with just tropical moisture building in. Some places could pick up nearly a half foot of rainfall over the next 4 to 5 days. Flooding is going to be a big concern to watch out for across the western Gulf states as we head through the second half of the week. Vlad, back to you.
All right, Grant, thank you very much, brother. We'll check in with you a little bit later.
Yeah.
A luxury plane used by Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro is now in the hands of the United States. Why it was seized and how Maduro's government is responding, that's coming up next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. A man in New Hampshire, you can see him right there in the image behind me, has tested positive for 3 potentially deadly mosquito-borne illnesses. His name, Joe Casey, and his family tell CBS News he's fighting for his life, and he has experienced brain swelling. The 54-year-old has been diagnosed with triple E West Nile virus and St. Louis encephalitis. According to his family, Casey first began to feel sick about 3 weeks ago. Since then, he's lost his ability to move, his ability to communicate, and doctors say they aren't even sure which of the 3 diseases is responsible for making his condition so progressed. Okay, our other story. U.S. authorities seized the luxury jet owned by Venezuela's leader, Nicolas Maduro, yesterday. Justice Department claims the aircraft was illegally purchased, which violates sanctions and export control laws. CBS News correspondent Christian Benavides joins me now for more on this. Christian, walk our audience through how this all happened and how the Venezuelan government is responding.
Vlad, good morning. Well, the Venezuelan government in a statement said that what the U.S. has done is criminal. Keep this in mind. This is essentially Venezuela's version of Air Force One. Maduro has been pictured next to this aircraft traveling the world. He's used it for state visits. He's gone to Brazil, according to records, China, and Cuba on this aircraft, which reportedly was in the Dominican Republic for maintenance when U.S. officials were able to seize it and then bring it here to Fort Lauderdale. The reason it was brought to South Florida is because it was initially purchased here in South Florida through a shell company, the government alleges, for the use of Maduro. This shell company based in the Caribbean bought it here in South Florida, took it to the Caribbean, and then eventually took it to Venezuela, where this was being used, as I mentioned, as essentially Air Force One for Nicolas Maduro, which is against the sanctions that are currently in place. And we'll have to see how the Venezuelan government continues to respond to something like this. Something interesting that I should mention is that overnight they issued an arrest warrant for Edmundo Gonzalez, who is the opposition candidate over those disputed elections that took place in July. That candidate is also who the U.S. and multiple other countries sees as the legitimate winner of that election.
So a warrant, as you know, Christian, was issued by a Venezuelan judge for the arrest of opposition leader Edmundo Gonzalez. What are you learning about that?
Well, that's exactly it. At this point, the Venezuelan government, what we know is that had called for him to testify in front of a judge over the disputed election. What was widely expected is that if he were to show up to court, that he would be taken into custody. So he had not shown up to multiple court hearings, and at this point they've issued this arrest warrant. Look, all of this goes back to the disputed election. At the end of the day, experts that have analyzed this say that the opposition, they brought the receipts. They showed what the vote tallies were in multiple different precincts, while the government has not done so to the extent that has quieted some of the folks out there. Again, the disputed election continues to be disputed by multiple countries, including here in the U.S. Vlad?
All right, Christian Benavides reporting for us from Fort Lauderdale. Thank you so much, Christian. Appreciate it, brother. All right, we're following a lot more news coming in. Check it out. It's happening right behind me. We're going to bring it to you. We'll be right back. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. California lawmakers are debating measures proposed by Governor Gavin Newsom that are aimed at reducing gas prices in the state. CBS News Sacramento reporter Madison Keeby has more.
It may not cost as much to fill up this summer compared to last, but California drivers, on average, still pay 90 cents more a gallon than the rest of the country.
I got a budget for it.
Energy affordability. It's the centerpiece of a series of bills and a last-minute call for a special session from the desk of Governor Gavin Newsom.
More cost for me.
Steady the oil supply and steady prices for drivers like Claudia. The governor wants to set minimum inventory requirements for oil refineries, that no matter what was going on, a steady source of fuel would be there.
Problem is, it came a little late in the session, and it's causing a little bit of a push and shove. But bottom line, when you look at the facts and you look at the research by the California Energy Commission, there's no disputing.
Oil refineries disagree, and in one statement said this kind of regulation would actually make gas prices go up.
I'm able to afford it. I mean, I pay for it.
Back at the state capitol, where do things go from here? The state oil czar, a position created the last time the governor called for a special session, was asked about that role last month by our own Marley Ginter.
Is that enough what your office is able to do then?
I think we've got amazing tools in the legislation, and it was passed during a special session, which means that the governor and the entire legislature focused their attention to create new resources.
All right, we continue to follow the breaking news out of Europe. As we told you earlier, a boat carrying some migrants has capsized while attempting to cross the English Channel from France on its way to Britain. We are learning that some folks have been killed. Dozens of people are involved. So let's bring in BBC News reporter Hugh Schofield, who's joining us now from Paris to tell us what he's learning about this horrific story. And this is one that we've seen play out before, Hugh. Migrants desperately trying to reach European shores and in some cases losing their life. What can you tell us about this incident?
It's a major incident. I'm sad to say that there are smaller incidents all the time now along that stretch of water. The attempts to cross to England continue all the time, and throughout July, August, there were several fatalities, but they tend to come in ones and twos. This is a much bigger event. This looks like 12 dead at least. Possibly a little bit more. It looks like that it was a kind of classic situation, though. One of these rubberized motor dinghies that attempts to take people across got into difficulty off Boulogne-sur-Mer, not far from Calais, but further down the coast from Calais. It was spotted by a French boat, but already this embarkation, this rubber dinghy thing was breaking up, and by the time rescue services were able to reach the scene, there were several dead. Everyone was in the water, and several of the people had drowned. So the operation was launched, of course, and most people were brought back to France, but now they're saying that the death toll is 12 or maybe even a bit more. So it is the worst death toll this year, and it brings the overall death toll this year to 37, which is well in advance of the death toll for last year. And that is a sign of how the situation is getting worse as more and more people try to make the crossing, and as unscrupulous trafficking gangs put them on boats that are quite frankly, clearly unseaworthy.
Yeah, and Hugh, we just showed the map there for our people here in the United States who are just watching that. It doesn't look like a great distance, but the English Channel is incredibly treacherous, and Boulogne-sur-Mer is not very far from where they sort of embarked on that journey across the Channel to the UK. And so it just sort of underscores how dangerous this journey is, and sadly now a dozen people have lost their lives. Hugh Schofield reporting from the BBC for us in Paris. Hugh, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Okay, folks, an encore of CBS Mornings is coming up next. This is CBS News 24/7.